In 1796, Gilbert Stuart would paint the portrait that would later go on to be his most notable work. The subject was the then President of the United States, George Washington. What separates Stuart's magnus opus from other great artists is that his portrait of George Washington was never finished. If you feel like you recognize this portrait of George Washington's face, it's probably because you've seen some of the paintings Stuart created afterwards as copies and sold as finished portraits. He apparently made 130 copies in total. Also, you might have seen this portrayal of Washington mirrored on the $1 bill. When I started looking into the topic of unfinished works, I was surprised by how many things still became useful in one way or another. Most of us probably consider any creation not completed as also missing out on being useful. There are multiple things that captivate me with unfinished works. Partly it opens up for your own imagination to fill out the missing pieces. Also, there is a slight sadness that we can see that something was intended to exist, but as it stands now, no one will ever experience it. And it creates a feeling of relatability, knowing that even great artists procrastinate from one time or another. There is still the difference of no one caring about your abandoned projects. I couldn't really find a reliable explanation why Stuart never finished the painting. One article I read stated it was an intentional business move, so he could use the painting as a reference to create the 130 copies, which he would sell for $100 per piece, which seems to be around $2,500 in today's money for every copy. So if it was an intentional business move or just a happy accident, Stuart could still find a use for his unfinished work. But some abandoned projects have found use not by the original creator, but by other people repurposing the work. David Brillenberg, a successful banker, is looking into building a new headquarters for his bank. With the economic liberalization sweeping many nations in the 80s, the banking industry is booming. Credit is cheap, and so he decides that the best course of action is to build a complex of 6 buildings, with one building planned to be among the tallest skyscrapers in the city. There is just one small problem though. His bank is located in Caracas, and he commissioned the construction just a few years before the Venezuelan banking crisis of 1994. A crisis that saw the Venezuelan government bailing out and taking over several of the nation's private banks. A bank, a construction company, and a budget can fail, but the concrete and steel that makes up a building doesn't just vanish overnight. And in the 4 years leading up to the banking crisis of 1994, the Centro Financiero Confianza, or Tower of David as it was also referred to given the name of the bank's founder, had been around 75% complete. What had been finished was the core structure and load-bearing elements of the building, while the inside was still completely bare bone. Meaning the government now owned a 45-story unfinished skyscraper stretching 170 meters up in the air in the middle of the nation's capital, with no direct way of profiting from it. Walking around town and seeing a construction site is nothing special, and for the first couple of years it seems to have been left alone. But this is where the story takes a weird turn. Having been built during more economically liberal times, by the early 2000s, the building was now left in a socialist country, where the government had started to expropriate private capital. Fearing forced government takeover of business and property, housing construction ground to a halt, with no one wanting to risk money in residential projects, which led to a shortage in the housing market. Since David had passed away and the bank itself had been taken over by the government, there was no longer any need for the skyscraper to house a banking headquarters, and was therefore left completely abandoned. For those people without a steady living situation, the opportunity to get a centrally located place of their own with a good view over the city soon emerged when ex-criminals broke in and took over the site. Soon, more people started taking up residence inside of the abandoned skyscraper. If I say homeless encampment, you might imagine people covering themselves in dirty blankets, hurtling around a lit barrel trying to stay warm. But these people who started to move in were just regular people with a daytime job, some educated, some skilled labor. They brought an optimistic can-do attitude, seeing the building as not missing essential features of an apartment complex. It was rich in opportunities to create one's own dream home. They began building walls to section off the skyscraper into apartments, and as more people moved in, demand for utilities rose. Some crafty residents were able to install and connect electricity and water that would reach halfway up the skyscraper. There were elevator shafts, but no actual elevators were ever installed. And since the first 10 floors were unsuitable for creating apartments, some people with a motorcycle started a taxi service to drive residents up. You would still have to climb the rest of the stairs up to your apartment though. With the law turning a blind eye to the situation, you of course get an increase in crime and violence, especially since a lot of the place was set up by and run by ex-criminals. But what I could find, the other residents started to organize to help drive unsavory types out of the building. For every floor, they had a person responsible for making sure everyone followed the rules regarding cleaning public areas and living peacefully, slowly forcing away the undesirables. Since thousands of people, yes, thousands of people, had started to live in the tower, grocery stores, barber shops, and according to the Wikipedia article, an unlicensed dentist clinic opened up inside of the tower. At its peak, an estimated 10,000 people lived in the tower, and a short documentary on YouTube refers to it as the world's tallest slum. But all good things must come to an end. The residents were forcefully evicted in 2014, but they weren't just thrown into the streets. They were relocated to housing units the government had acquired for this specific purpose. The story is not over though. You see, the tightly controlled economic system had not solved the initial problem with housing, and so there was still a big shortage of homes in Venezuela. These new houses the residents of the Tower of David were supposed to move to were already being squatted by other people in need of housing. Today, the Tower of David sits empty in central Caracas, and there are still no plans to finish the tower, either as office space or as an apartment complex. It is well known businesses can rise and fall depending on market factors. Buildings being left in an unfinished state has happened multiple times, even when building the building is without a profit incentive. During the 1820s, a series of majestic Greek columns were raised on Calton Hill in Edinburgh, Scotland. The construction was originally proposed by the Royal Highland Society of Scotland in 1816 as a monument to commemorate the Scottish soldiers who fought in the Napoleonic Wars. One of the feats of bravery from that war was the actions of the 2nd Dragoons Cavalry Unit, also known as the Royal Scots Greys. Despite seeing very little combat during the war, they participated in the final Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The unit was initially kept as a tactical reserve on the battlefield, together with 2 other cavalry units. But as the battle progressed, the French infantry had started to pressure the British centre to the point of collapse, resulting in the Royal Scots Greys being the last cavalry unit not committed to battle by General Uxbridge. When Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton, the commander of the Royal Scots Greys, saw the British 92nd Regiment of Foot crumbling and the soldiers retreating, he stopped waiting for orders. He took the initiative and signaled his cavalry unit to engage. Due to the terrain and having friendly units in front of them, they did not charge into battle as portrayed in the famous painting by Lady Butler named Scotland Forever. But despite moving at a slow pace, their initial clash with the French units were described as actually walking over the French column. What followed is something that could be described as an almost endless series of continued charges against the French lines, losing men, horses, and organization with every assault, but showing no signs of losing dedication or morale. Experiencing all the parts of classic battles you probably have heard of, up-close sword duels with the enemy, making charging sweeps in formation against the French positions, and stealing the enemy's banners and symbols to bring home as trophies. No single unit won the Battle of Waterloo, but the participation of the 2nd Dragoons is clear from more than just witness accounts. When the battle was over, out of the 368 men and officers that made up the unit, only 169, that is less than half, remained in fighting condition. Wanting to honor these kinds of acts and inspire future generations of soldiers, the project to build a national monument moved forward in 1822, when members of Scotland's aristocracy and Edinburgh's cultural elite supported such an idea. Later in the same year, the UK Parliament approved creating an association for funding the construction, splitting the funding between the state and private actors, with a majority coming from private donors. The actual construction could begin in 1826. And then stopped 3 years later in 1829 due to a lack of funding. Yes, even when it is to commemorate veterans who fought and to inspire future generations of soldiers to win wars, the cold reality of economics can still win out. The monument, as you can see today, is not how it was envisioned in the early 19th century. What stands on the hill today is an unfinished replica of this. The initial plan was to create a facsimile of the Parthenon, a Greek ruin in Athens, adding catacombs inside of Calton Hill beneath the monument, where future heroes of the nation could be buried. Since 1829, multiple plans have been put forth to finish the monument. Some incorporate new ideas of people or events to honor in an attempt to invigorate the project, but so far none has become reality. Since nothing has happened to the project for close to 200 years, it might be easy to think of the monument as an abandoned project, doomed to remain unfinished forever. But throughout history, there have been buildings existing in an unfinished state for hundreds of years that still ended up completed. The world record for longest construction time belongs to the Cologne Cathedral, which started construction in 1248 and did not finish until 1880, meaning it took 632 years to complete, with many hundreds of those years seeing no progress whatsoever. So maybe the National Monument isn't abandoned, but we are just living parallel to its construction. When you think about it, finishing a work could be a question of definition. Writing is often not a linear process where you start from the first sentence and then create each article sequentially. Me writing this script has indeed been a very dynamic project. Imagine yourself having a normal day at the office when suddenly some agents show up. They take you aside and explain that you are the suspect of a crime. They do not tell you where they come from. They also don't tell you anything about the crime you've supposedly committed. You are instructed to attend a trial. The date, time, and place is not declared. What actions you've undertaken that are under scrutiny is also not explained, meaning you have no real chance of defending yourself. And if this isn't strange enough, on top of it all, you are under arrest. You are just allowed to carry on with your duties at the office as normal. In totalitarian states, when the regime wants to get rid of a person, he or she might be accused by some unregulated secret police of a crime resulting from an action that in practice may not have had any real alternatives, and the judgment being reached in an incoherent way. Such a situation is often referred to as Some of you might have recognized the scene I described earlier, which was taken from his most famous work, The Trial. A very core theme and often mentioned aspect of the story is how the protagonist, Joseph, is never forced to go along with the trials, but that authorities, responsibilities, and justifications are implied, and the beliefs and inner expectations of the protagonist is what makes him follow the instructions, meaning the ultimate authority that forces him is himself. The fate of the protagonist is a brutal one. On his 31st birthday, Joseph is escorted by two anonymous men, the author never describing what jurisdiction or authority they would belong to. After bringing Joseph to the outskirts of the city, the two anonymous men execute him. Neither Joseph nor us the reader ever gets to know what he was accused of. But for the reader, there are more pieces missing from the story. We get to read about the first courtroom proceeding and the disturbing and absurd events that follow, which lets the reader slowly understand the futility in trying to prove one's innocence in this system, hinting at how such procedures are designed to be never-ending. Since Kafka never wrote the chapters that would carry the story from the continuous trials to a very direct and decisive outcome, we can only speculate what takes place in between those events. Perhaps the procedures were always meant as a facade for more covert forces acting. Maybe Kafka was working with fundamentally incoherent ideas of the story. But you have to agree with me that it is quite fitting for the theme of the novel that the trial's conclusion itself is kept in the dark. Authors seems to always be working on stories, and it's nothing unique with Kafka leaving an incomplete story behind him. By the way, sorry if I spoil the ending of The Trial for you. I think the book could still be worth a read. I can only promise you that I won't spoil any other story endings for you in this video. During the societal changes of the Industrial Revolution, Charles Dickens became a successful author by the stories involving ordinary people's lives, serving as a social commentary of life in Britain at that time. Fictional characters like Oliver Twist and David Copperfield are still known by people today, despite the works being over 100 years old. Most know the basic storyline of how the greedy and ungenerous Ebenezer Scrooge gets visited by the ghosts of his former partner, and then afterwards 3 ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come. But perhaps you have not heard of his novel The Mystery of Edwin Drood. It's a crime mystery novel about the disappearance of Edwin Drood. In keeping with the themes of Dickens' other works, Edwin grew up as an orphan. But before his parents died, they arranged for him and a girl named Rosa Budd, also an orphan, to be engaged. But Rosa is also the love interest of other people in the story. John Jasper, the uncle and guardian of Edwin, and Rosa's music teacher, who lives a double life as both an upstanding member of the church while also visiting opium dens in the cover of night. Another person who gets smitten by Rosa is Neville, who together with his twin sister, both orphans, arrive at Cloisterham and is introduced by a Mr. Crisparkle. I'm not going to go through all the characters and their relation to the story, because I think you already see what is being developed here. It's a story about a crime of passion. Someone murders Edwin in order to break off his engagement with Rosa, so that someone else can marry her. Well, what you may not expect is that even though Edwin and Rosa were arranged to be wed by their parents, there is a scene where they both sit and talk about their engagement, and in a very calm and still manner come to the shared conclusion they should break it off. Both feel like there is no longer any love between them. Apart from the social taboo in Victorian Britain to break not only an engagement but also what could be seen as a vow to their parents, no one in this story would really lose out on them going through with this plan, meaning there would be no need to murder Edwin for Rosa to be able to marry someone else. And there is no corpse of Edwin. He is only described as having disappeared with a criminal action implied. So, who did it? Well, I can't spoil the ending for you. Charles Dickens died before writing it. People have researched notes and letters to see if Dickens at least had an idea for the conclusion. The most popular guess is that Edwin's uncle, John Jasper, in some way kills him, but we couldn't really say for sure. We don't even know if Edwin's disappearance was forced or by his own will. Multiple authors have taken the liberty to write their own conclusions of the story, and there seems to be an interest in studying the story as if it was a real-life murder case. But at the end of the day, spoiler warnings are not needed for this story. Finally, I wanted to talk about the unfinished works whose usage may not come about for some hundreds of years in the future. When we study ruins from ancient times, one clue it gives us is the technological understanding of the civilization that built them. In our times, there are works that are left unfinished, but could potentially serve a similar purpose in the future. A sort of ruin in the making. Before 2010, the only connection between China and North Korea over the Yalu River was a single-track railroad bridge and an old motor bridge utilizing just one reversible lane. Both countries agreed that a new bridge was needed to be built at modern standards to remove the river crossing as a bottleneck. In 2014, a 4-lane bridge able to carry tons of traffic going both ways every day was completed. But someone had cheated on their homework. Because you see, while China had connected the bridge to its road network, as well as creating a customs terminal, on the North Korean side, not much had happened at all. And for several years the project stood still. The North Korean regime took the opportunity to blame COVID back in the early 2020s. As of 2025, work has apparently begun on the terminal on the North Korean side with funding from the Chinese. But still, driving over this bridge will take you nowhere. But don't think this only happens as the result of authoritarian governments with planned economies. You probably don't even have to leave your own country to see such structures. In post-war Germany, a series of highway projects were started. Trying to speed up the projects, they made sure to build on multiple parts of the highway at the same time. And when it comes to bridges, there are good arguments for building them beforehand. That way the bridges or overpasses can settle in, and it's also easier to adapt the road to an existing bridge rather than the other way around. But some of these highway projects fell through for different reasons, most relating to political prioritizations. The stretches of highways that had been constructed were integrated into the existing road network, while the bridges were left in place as they were, only able to connect nowhere to nowhere. In Germany, they are referred to as Sådabrücke, roughly translating into just their bridges. I usually don't think of the sizes of overpasses when I see them in real life, but seeing these bridges in their disconnected state really shows off the scale of a highway overpass. Looking at them, the word behemoths comes to mind. So, those were some examples of unfinished works. They are all around us, and you can probably think of some examples of your own. There was a lot more I could have talked about in this video, but I wanted to keep it a little bit more focused. If you've watched this far, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the content, and I will get into working on my next essay. Thank you for watching.